Good evening. It is time to begin. We appreciate everyone's presence here this evening on, March 4th, 2026. So glad you come out and be with us. If you are joining us on the live stream, we're glad that you've joined us that way. We're going to have a couple songs and prayers we normally do. Shane, they say they can't hear me. Test. There. Okay. All right. Couple couple songs and a prayer, and then we'll have some announcements before we dismiss the class. Jabari's going to be leading our singing, and Ralph will have our opening prayer. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jabari.
Tonight we'll be singing "There's a Fountain Free." There's a fountain free, 'tis for you and me. Let us taste so grace to its spring. 'Tis the fount of love from the source above, and He bids us all freely drink. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul, hear the welcome call. 'Tis the fountain open for all. There's a living stream with a crystal gleam from the throne of life. Now it flows. Troubled waters roll. Let the weary soul hear the call that forth freely goes. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul, hear the welcome call. 'Tis a fountain open for all.
Folks, there's a lot of bad things going on in this world right now. You know what's happening in Iran. And you can see it at the gas pumps, right? The second day, gas jumped 20, 30 cents a gallon. Sickness on all sides. We've had it. Mary's had it. Other folks in here have had it. Just a long list of folks who have been sick. The reason I say all that, ask you for your prayers at home. Pray for our country. Pray for our leaders. Pray for our service people who are involved in this. 3 planes were shot down, American planes, by our own people, so to speak. But they got out. But there's all kinds of things going on. Please pray in your private prayers, wherever you pray, driving, at home, wherever, for our world situation. Let us pray. Father, we do thank you for all the good things you do for us and all the things that you have done. And we know that you have our best interest at heart, whether sometimes we can actually see it. As we remember your servant Job, he couldn't understand what was happening. Sometimes we don't understand what's happening, and so we just have to put our trust and faith in you, and help us to do that, Lord, and know that you will work things out for our good. Father, we pray for our country in this business that's going on now in Iran and the elections and stuff that's happening in places. And it seems like people are bent on just being as bad as they can be. And so we ask you to help our people making these rules and decisions and give them wisdom. Let them look to you for guidance so that they do the right thing that you would have them to do. Please forgive us of our sins, and please guide us, Lord, each day as we live, and help us to be a shining light for those round about us. They will be curious at least and want to see what makes us do the things that we do. Father, we pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
The next song is Our God, He is Alive. There is beyond the azure blue a God who still from human side. He tends his skies with heavenly hue and framed the worlds with his great mind. There is a God, He is alive. In Him we live and we survive. From the
Just a few announcements before we dismiss to our classes. Ronnie Smith had hip surgery earlier today and is already home. Please pray for a full recovery for him. And also, please remember Margie in your prayers. She said she'll be having some more injections, some nerve blocks next month. And she said she was really uncomfortable up at the surgery today, sitting on those uncomfortable waiting room chairs. So please keep both of them in your prayers. Michael LeDuc is going back to the Mayo Clinic tomorrow for doctor's appointments. Please continue to pray for his recovery and for their safe travel. Maurice Day, this is Monty's son-in-law, had 2 surgeries to remove the cancer. They got it all, and he is doing well, so that is good news there. And then Christy Day, Monty's daughter, is having surgery this Friday. Prayers are requested for it to go smoothly with a quick recovery. Tana McLaughlin will be going back to MD Anderson on the 19th to place some seeds in the tumor to reduce it, so please keep her in your prayers as that is upcoming. And we got an update on Linda King today. Most of you know Linda is a former member here who recently moved up to Maryland. She did have a significant stroke, and her daughter Kathy said that she's going to need to be in a long-term care facility. And so that's not real good news for Linda. And also, they're having trouble dealing with the infection that is in Linda's hip. So please keep Linda in your prayers. Charlie Neal will be having surgery next Monday, the 9th, so please keep him in prayer. And then also, Charlie and Wanda's great-grandson, Cohen Norris, is home from the hospital. He's had no fever, still doesn't have much of an appetite, but seems to be getting some better. So please continue to remember Cohen in your prayers. And then Mark is coming home tomorrow evening, really late, about 11:30. So please keep him in your prayers as he travels home tomorrow evening. The Ladies' Day brunch is this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Come early to get a good seat and bring your potluck item. Tonight is the last night that you can sign up, ladies, if you are planning on coming to the Ladies' Day brunch. So if you have not signed up yet, please do so tonight, and that sign-up sheet is on the bulletin board in the foyer. The Fort Walton Beach congregation is having a Share Fest this Saturday from 8 to 4, so if you're interested in that. And then don't forget, if you still have clocks that require it, time changes this Saturday night. Spring forward 1 hour, or you can stay up till 2 a.m. and spring forward then, but you're going to lose an hour of sleep this Saturday, so make sure you set your clocks forward so you're not late for Bible class or worship services on Sunday morning. And then mark this on your calendars for later on this month. There will be a yard sale at Pam Moon's house the 27th and 28th of this month. So if you want to participate in that, Pam just opens that up. You can bring your stuff and sit out there and sell it. So be gathering your stuff, and we'll remind everybody about that again as that date gets closer. All right, these are all the announcements I have. You're dismissed to your classes. Y'all not in your assigned seat. The voices in your head hurt. Uh-oh. Don't name any names now, Ron. All right, so tonight is going to be our last lesson in this series on stress busters, and we're going to be looking at God's prescription for burnout. But there is a fill-in outline. I put them out a little late. Some of y'all had already gotten here, but there are outlines. If you want an outline, they're out before you if you want to go grab one. We're going to do a little test here right at the beginning about stress before we get into our passage for this evening. I'm going to show you a picture here in just a moment. This picture has 2 identical dolphins in it. And it was used in a case study on stress levels at St. Mary's Hospital. By the way, Frank forwarded this to me, so he's taken it before. So what
I'm pretty stressed.
Yeah, it's for stress. It's a stress test. So what you're going to do is when I put the picture up here, I want you to look at both dolphins jumping out of the water. Okay, remember, these dolphins are identical. A closely monitored scientific study of a group revealed that in spite of the fact that the dolphins are identical, a person under stress would find differences in the two dolphins. Okay? If there are many differences found between both dolphins, it means that that person is experiencing a great amount of stress. All right? So I want you to look at the photograph, and if you find more than one or two differences, you might want to think about taking a vacation, because it probably means that you're very stressed. Okay? Are y'all ready? Here we go. Remember, these dolphins are identical. But if you see differences, that means you're stressed. Y'all ready? How many of y'all see one or two differences? Really? Just a couple of y'all?
I've seen more than two.
More than two, okay. If you see more than two, again, you're probably very stressed and you need a vacation. All right. Y'all can thank Frank for that one.
Anyone surprised?
Yeah. I'm just surprised it's not a balloon cow. All right.
Like a water buffalo.
Yeah, it's a water buffalo. There you go. All right, so open your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 19. This is where we're going to be tonight. Because in 1 Kings 19, we find basically God's prescription for burnout. And we're going to be looking at several verses here. And hopefully this sounds familiar to some of y'all, because I did preach a sermon on this a while back. So if you don't remember anything, that means you either weren't here or you weren't paying attention.
Or they're too stressed.
Yeah, or you were too stressed. Okay? So before we get into it, just give you a little bit of background about what's going on here with Elijah. He lived in about the 9th century BC. He was a prophet who served God during the reign of several kings, and one especially bad ruler, Ahab, who was married to Queen Jezebel. And a lot of Elijah's ministry involved the conflict between himself and the royal couple, Ahab and Jezebel, over their introduction of pagan worship to Israel. Jezebel, historians tell us, was from the city of Tyre, T-Y-R-E, and through her influence, the worship of Baal Melquart, the official nature god of Tyre. Now, did any of y'all know that that was the Baal that they were serving? I didn't know that until I studied this. Okay, you what?
That was news to me
Yeah,
also.
okay. But it makes sense, okay, because she brought that worship, he was the official nature god of Tyre. So in response to that, anybody remember what Elijah did to begin with? I mean, God told him to do it, but what did Elijah do? He prayed and something happened. Yeah, it stopped raining. There was a drought for 3 years. So God was showing Ahab and Jezebel, no, I'm the God over nature, not your idol God here. Okay? So it did rain for 3 years, and of course this drought made the king and queen greater enemies of Elijah. So after 3 years, Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to a contest basically at Mount Carmel. You know, he's had enough. God's had enough, and so he tells the people of Israel, you gather up here on Mount Carmel, and he tells Jezebel and Ahab, you send your prophets, and how many of them showed up? 450. Okay? 450 prophets of Baal showed up, and what was the challenge that Elijah issued? Yeah, we're each going to pray to our God. Elijah's going to pray to God, the God, and the prophets of Baal are going to pray to Baal, and they set up this altar with this sacrifice on it, and whichever God would send fire down, then we'll believe in that God. So what did the prophets of Baal do? Anybody remember?
They prayed.
Yeah, they prayed, they chanted, they danced, they cut themselves for half the day, and nothing happened. And of course, Elijah's kind of taunting them along through, pray louder, maybe he's on vacation. I would have loved to have been there to witness that. Okay? So then after nothing happened, it's Elijah's turn. And before he prays, he has them douse the sacrifice with all that water. They dug the trench around there. They pour enough water on so it fills the trench up. Elijah prays the prayer to God, and God sends down fire, and it completely consumes the sacrifice, all the water, everything. And so then what does Elijah tell the gathered people there to do?
They killed all the...
Yeah, take all, lay hands on the 450 prophets of Baal, you take them down to the stream and you put them to death, and that's what they did. How do you think that made Jezebel and Ahab feel? Yeah, they weren't real happy. Okay? So that's where we pick up in 1 Kings chapter 19. And we're going to look at verses 1 through 3 to begin with here. So Frank, I'll let you read those.
All right. Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and even more if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." And he was afraid and rose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, where it belongs, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there.
All right, so again, and we're going to kind of break this down by verses here. Elijah has just, and for those of you who were here for my series of sermons about, the mountaintops and the valleys, okay, Elijah has just experienced a mountaintop moment. He's challenged the prophets of Baal, he has succeeded, but now he immediately enters a valley because of what?
Threat.
Yeah. Jezebel's like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to do to you what you had done to my prophets. And notice what she says. So may the gods do to me and even more if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. So basically she said, you got 24 hours to live, Elijah. So what does he do? He runs. As, most people would. He runs for his life. Comes to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. We didn't get to it, okay? But he goes on a little further here in just a moment, all right? But, and I've already kind of covered the background right here, all right? We see some things happening, some symptoms of burnout that Elijah experienced that were beyond the normal life of most people. Okay? Elijah experienced a lot of things which caused stress. And of course, they didn't use that term back then, but we're using it today. But these things would cause stress in his life. And again, some of these things can be positive stresses. Okay? He witnessed a miracle. He actually prayed for it. What was the miracle? Well, actually, there were a couple. The fire from heaven was one.
No rain.
Yeah, the no rain for 3 years, okay? But he's also suffering through what we call that natural disaster, that drought, right? He's seen war going on. He's got death threats. He's being forced to travel. He's forced into hiding. He's been rejected by his society. So he's under a lot of stress right here. And so we're going to look at some symptoms of burnout that we see illustrated in Elijah's life right here in the next few verses. So let's look beginning at verse 4. And the first symptom we see is what? Despair. Despair. Verse 4 he says, "But he himself," so he left his servant at Beersheba, "he himself on a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree and did what? Requested for himself that he might die." Why?
He's tired.
Yeah, he's burned out. He's exhausted. Again, I would have loved to have been there and seen, what's been going on. But again, for 3 years, this drought's been going on. That's taken a toll on the land. It's taken a toll on everybody. He's had to suffer through that. Now he's had this great victory, but immediately afterwards, Jezebel puts a death threat on him. She's got a hit out on him. I'm going to kill you by this time tomorrow. You've got 24 hours to live. So he's to the point of despair. He just wants to die. He's saying, God, take me. Just let me die. So that's one of the first symptoms of burnout.
I've always wondered how he went from such a paragon of faith and virtue by standing up to the 450 prophets of Baal to this point where he had no faith hardly. Mm-hmm. He said, okay, God did all this, but now he's going to abandon me here? Yeah, I guess that's part one of the signs of...
Yes, and we're going to get to that one in just a moment, Becky. When you're tired, you don't think straight. When you're burned out, you don't think straight. Hold on, that will come back to it. You don't necessarily have to raise your hand for this, but how many of you have ever been to this point where you just felt despair? And I don't mean that you can raise your hand. I don't necessarily mean that you're suicidal, but you've got no will to live. You just don't feel like it's worth going on any further. That's how Elijah felt right here. And as Frank just pointed out, it's kind of hard to imagine unless you've been there that you can be on that mountaintop that he was on and come down so quickly and experience these emotions that he's experiencing right here that quickly. But that's how fast things can change in our lives. That's how quickly we can go from the victories and the mountaintops to, and it doesn't take long. I mean, look, 24 hours for Elijah there. All right, so then the second symptom we see is found in the second half of that verse, and that is low self-esteem. What does Elijah say right there?
I'm no better than my father.
Yeah, take my life, I am not better than my fathers. Now, what does he mean by that?
His ancestors.
Yeah, his ancestors, but what does he mean by I'm not better than them?
He didn't have as much faith as they had.
Okay, maybe he didn't have as much faith. Again.
Motley crew.
Do what?
They were a motley crew.
They were a motley crew. Okay. Chris?
I think it kind of ties along the faith side, just from a personal standpoint, experiencing that you feel like you've gone so far, and then when you're in that moment of despair, you feel like you haven't really gotten anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Here you are, you thought you were, for lack of a word, better than
Yeah.
that, and then there you are with your face in the dirt.
Mm-hmm. What'd you say, Becky?
So it's like, well, I'm not living, my fathers were already dead. Why not take them too?
Well, that could be. My father's already dead. Why not take me? Why am I still alive? I think what he's getting at right here is he's like, I haven't been able to do any better than them. When he says his fathers here, he's talking about his ancestors. Okay, those that have prophesied before him, those that have been trying to do God's will. And again, notice he's just had this great victory. You think, oh, we've put to death these prophets of Baal, but what was the result of that?
Come on,
Everybody
wanted
hates
man.
it without for him now.
Yeah. So what good did this showdown really do? I think that's what he's saying right here. I just accomplished this, but what good did it do? Now there's a hit out on me. And even though the people put to death the prophets of Baal, there was no great revival in that moment. They didn't go storm the palace and take Ahab and Jezebel off the throne and restore right worship to Israel. That didn't happen immediately. And so I think he's feeling kind of, well, what good did I do? What did I accomplish by that? Yeah, I put those prophets to death because they're worshiping idol gods, but now I'm on the run. So he's got some really low self-esteem. And again, you've probably been there before. You do something, you accomplish it, but then you look and you're like, but what good did it do? Nothing's really changed here. Yes, I may have done this, I may have completed this task or whatever, but nothing really in the big picture has changed. So he's really suffering some low self-esteem. All right, now let's look at the third symptom of burnout, and we're going to skip down to verse 10. Frank, I'll let you read that one.
Sure. He said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away.
So the third symptom of burnout is anger and resentment. Who is Elijah angry at here?
I thank God.
Okay, he's angry at himself, I think, because he's, like we just said, he's like, what good is this accomplished? I think he's angry at God.
Yes.
Because God's the one that told him to do this and that. God's the one that brought the drought. God's the one that, sent down the fire. And so, you can kind of see these symptoms kind of go in steps here. So he gets to this point where he's just angry. God, why are you bringing me through this? Well, why do all that just to get me to this point right here, You would think, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here and kind of putting myself in Elijah's place, but if I was Elijah, I'd be thinking, God, we killed the 450 prophets. You proved that you're God. Why didn't more happen? Why didn't you cause a revival among the people? Why am I not having to run for my life? God, this is your fault. Now, he doesn't come right out and say that, okay? But I think that's the emotion that he's feeling here. He's angry at God because God's kind of the one that's got him in this situation.
Well, how different is he from the Israelite people in the desert? Why'd you bring us out of Egypt just to starve to death here in the desert?
Yeah.
At least we had food there.
And even before that, when they're between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea, they're like, you brought us out here to kill us.
Yep.
So he's angry. He's resentful. You do your best. You try your hardest. You succeed. You should feel good, not bad, right? And that's what we expect. But does that always happen? No. You do your best, you try your hardest, you succeed, and sometimes you still feel bad. And your only reward is fatigue and depression. And if you find yourself in that position, that's when you need to step back, because that's when you're close to burnout. All right, and then the fourth symptom that we see is isolation and loneliness. He repeats in verse 14 what he's just said in verse 10. But notice, and you got to go all the way back to verse 3, what does he, when he first fled, who was with him according to verse 3?
Servants.
Yeah, he had a servant with him. But what does he do? He leaves the servant at Beersheba and he goes on ahead by himself. One of the worst things you can do when you are stressed, when you're close to getting burned out, is be alone. And yet so often that's what we want to do, at least a lot of us. We want to be alone. We want to be left alone. That's one of the worst things you can do. And notice how he says that in the very last sentence there. What does he say?
All alone and they seek my life.
Yeah, I alone am left and they seek my life to take it away. He felt like he was the only one left serving God. So, that's where we find Elijah. Burnout makes us feel that no one understands, no one cares, no one knows how we feel, why we feel the way that we do. And so Elijah repeats his complaint to God as if the Lord can't possibly understand what Elijah's going through. Anybody ever feel like Elijah? I do, a lot of times. So, aside from the physical feelings of fatigue and the emotional problems associated with burnout, this condition also pushes us to make mistakes that we wouldn't normally make if we were balanced and rested. And so we want to look at a couple of those symptoms here that we see here, again, illustrated in Elijah's story. And then we're going to get to what God's prescription is for burnout. So, number one, the first mistake caused by burnout is we focus on emotions instead of facts. Again, what is Elijah focusing on here? And don't say emotions, okay? Tell me what he's focusing on.
Fear.
Staying alive.
Staying alive, yeah.
His perspective.
His fear,
Himself.
himself, his perspective, yeah. He's focusing on all of those things, all those negative things. He's looking inward and seeing the world through the lens of his feelings. Now, those of you that are familiar with the story, you know, was Elijah the only follower of God left in the land? No. Okay? But that's how he felt. He felt like he was the only one left because that's what he's focusing on, is himself and his feelings. And really, if you stop and think about it, I don't think he's focusing on the facts of what had just happened on Mount Carmel. If he had stopped and thought about that, he might not have gotten to the point that he was at right here. But he does what so many of us do. He feels like a failure, and so therefore what? He is a failure, at least in his own mind. Right?
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's called what therapists call emotional reasoning, and it's a mistake to do that. To look at everything through your own emotions that you're feeling at that time. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two is comparing yourself to others. Again, he cried out that he's no better than his fathers. But did really he need to be doing that? No. What did his fathers or his ancestors have to do with what he's doing right then and there? Nothing. Not a thing. But again, it's too easy to do that. And a lot of times what we do is we look at ourselves, especially when we get into situations like this, or we feel down, we're burned out, and we look at those that are around us and we look at the positive things that they have versus the negative things that we have. And we were comparing ourselves to other people. We compare our weaknesses to others' strengths, and when you do that, how are you always going to come out? Yeah, on the short end of the stick, basically.
Yeah, because we tend to pick out those better than us instead of those worse than us to make us feel good. So.
Now, I'm not necessarily saying we should look at people that are worse than us to make ourselves feel better. Don't compare yourself to others, good or bad. Okay? Focus on the situation and you know, figuring out what's going on with it and then trying to make it better. All right, saying number 3 is we are motivated by the negative. Again, you look at verse 10. Elijah complains that he had been zealous for God, but what is his complaint there?
He's the only one.
Yeah, nobody else has turned to follow you, God. Did Elijah forget what those people had just done to the 450 prophets? I don't think they would have done that if they didn't have some kind of belief in God. But he's not thinking about that. So he's only motivated by the negative things that are going on there. So we blame ourselves, we push ourselves with criticism, we label ourselves with harsh judgments. No wonder we feel bad. You've heard the phrase before, we are our own worst critics, right? Especially when we are in situations like this. We are our own worst critics. And then mistake number 4 is we tend to exaggerate the negatives. Again, what was Elijah doing? And don't say exaggerating the negatives. He is, but how? How's he doing that? What does he say there?
Like I'm the only one when he has no clue if he is or not.
Yeah, he says, I'm the only one left. Well, you know what? He was the only one left right there because why?
They ran away.
Yeah, because he ran away. He's by himself. Sure, you're going to feel like the only one when you're by yourself. You know, this turns into basically self-pity and despair. And this becomes a cycle, doesn't it? So we're overburdened, we're overstimulated, we're overworked, we're overstressed. This leads to weakened physical and mental resistance as well as spiritual letdown. And then this condition produces a variety of symptoms such as anger, depression, low self-esteem. These attitudes drive us to make critical mistakes such as emotional reasoning, false comparisons, negative self-judgment, further alienation from others, and then that produces more stress on our system, which starts a cycle all over again. So how do we break that cycle? And then this is the burnout cycle right there. How do we break that burnout cycle? Any ideas?
It starts with rest.
Okay, thank you. All right, God has a 4-part remedy that we see illustrated right here in the story of Elijah, and we're going to look at it again verse by verse. But the first one is rest. Let's look at verses, I think it's 5 through 8 right here. You want to read those?
Sure. He lay down and slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him. And he said to him, Arise, eat. Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God.
All right, now, we're not told how long he slept each time. All right, it could have been a very long time. I don't think this was just a little cat nap. All right, I think Elijah was worn out and God knew he needed some good rest. I think he was probably there for a couple of days. I think he had a meal one day, he slept, he slept, had a meal, slept, ate, slept some more. Okay? But the key there is it's rest. The body, the human body will short circuit if it doesn't get rest and nourishment. And so we've got to learn to have some balance in our lives. And the problem with people who get burned out, what's one of the first things they neglect? Themselves, but yeah, it's the term now is self-care. They neglect self-care because they're so busy or they're so, stressed out or whatever, they don't take the time to step away from work, step away from whatever's going on, to get some good nutritious food in their bodies. Okay? What people usually do is they rest just long enough until what?
They have the energy to continue.
Until they have the energy to keep going in that cycle that we just looked at. But there's got to be more than that. And part of this rest, part of it's the physical, yes. It's the physical sleep, it's the physical nourishment. But part of it is the emotional and the mental rest. And so we need to develop some attitudes that remind us we've got to rest. I mean, you look at the natural cycle that God has made in this world. the land rests every year, doesn't it? In the wintertime, everything goes dormant. Most everything goes dormant. It rests for a while, and then spring comes. It's that time of renewal. The same is true daily. We have periods of light, periods of darkness. God designed that darkness for the time for us to rest and sleep. We all understand. The body needs sleep. The body needs rest in order to perform the way that it needs to. But so often we don't do that. So one of the first things to breaking that cycle is to look at this part of the prescription and realize I need rest, and then what? Take it. You've got to take it.
Now, sleep deprivation is a real problem. How many times have you seen accident reports on TV where they suspect that the driver fell asleep at the wheel? And how many of you, if anyone has ever fell asleep at the wheel, besides me?
Very briefly.
It scared me to death.
Yeah.
I was coming home once from work overnight, and all of a sudden I ran off the road, and the gravel woke me up. But what scared me was I ran off the left side of the road, not the right side. So I said, oh gosh, so that scared the fire out of me. But what if you can only get about a 10-minute nap? Would that be helpful?
Better than nothing.
It is, because they've done a study, and I wish I looked it up to cite it, where they had two control groups. I think it was 10 or 12 in each group, where they deprived them of sleep. In a 48-hour period, they only allowed them to get a 30-minute sleep. One group got the 30 minutes in a 30-minute block. The other group got an equally spaced 3 10-minute blocks. Which group do you think did better? Those who had the 3 10-minute blocks. I know it's surprising. So if you can only take a 10-minute for yourself between our hectic pace, take that 10 minutes. If it's in your recliner, I've pulled over in rest stops before and put my seat back a little bit and set the alarm on my phone and get a little 10 or 15 minute recharge. It is better than nothing, as Chris said. So it's real.
And that's good to do, but more long-term is needed.
Oh, yes.
So if you realize that through this study or through your own observation that you are burned out or you're close to burning out, you've got to build, and you're going to have to schedule it probably. You're going to have to make time to take breaks, to stop whatever it is that's causing your burnout and do some self-care.
And sometimes you got to say no.
Yeah. You may have to set up some boundaries and tell people no, and you can do that in a nice, kind way, but if you can't take care of yourself, and I'm not saying be selfish and lazy, okay, that's the opposite end of the spectrum there. But when you're trying to burn your candle at both ends and in the middle and on the sides and everything, yeah, you're going to burn out. So you've got to set some boundaries. Chris?
I know you mentioned earlier the part about not separating from people, but there's a twofold to that, because Jesus withdrew often, and our society now does not know how to sit with itself and be alone, and there's a detriment to that. Yes, you can follow the depressions, and I've done that, but I also have always loved that period, because sometimes you have to pull away from everyone and everything to really fully see and hear God the way you should, and to recharge properly. And I think that ties into that rest, because sometimes we think, oh, well, we'll keep going to that friend and we're just replaying that thing. We're not actually resting. We're resting in what we're getting from them, or getting things off our chest, but we're not resting in God, which is a totally different thing. So
yeah, there's got to be a balance there.
Well, I think, Jesus was pressed by the crowd so often, that's why he got away by himself. Sometimes we have to separate ourselves from our stressors. And sometimes that may mean taking a time out
and he sent the disciples off even.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Take
He
it away
went
from y'all for a
up,
little
I'll go
while.
on across the lake. I'm going to join you. I need some time. I need some me time. And you got to recognize it. I know one of my memes that I liked when I was still working in medical field is I almost had a patient die in front of me today. But I took a breath, counted to 10, put the scissors back in my pocket, and she never knew.
Wow.
So I'm talking more this week.
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay. The second part of God's formula for our prescription for burnout is release. We specifically did not read verse 9, but I want to go back to verse 9. and look at it, because we looked at 10 and 14, but look at verse 9. So Elijah travels on, he came there to a cave and lodged there, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he, God, said to him, Elijah, what are you doing here, Elijah? And then this is the verse we read, verse 6. He said, I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. I think that's very interesting. God asks Elijah what's wrong, and then he lets Elijah vent. He lets him just get it all out. And he does it twice. And we pointed out, verse 10 and verse 14. He lets him kind of get everything out. The problem with burnout is it's like a low-burning fire. You know, it just kind of smolders inside and it never gets extinguished. It keeps burning and building and destroying us from the inside. So what we have to do is we have to learn to let all that out. We've got to pray, we've got to cry, we've got to share with others. Empty your heart out before God so that that emotional energy that's created by the stress, because it creates energy, it's just negative energy, okay? So that you can just let it out. And that is a necessary part to dealing with burnout, because so often we just keep it all in. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. We don't want to burden people with our problems, and so we don't ever release it and talk about it. Kathy Jo?
It reminds me of the pop-off valve on a pressure cooker or something like that. I mean, it's got to release that steam or else it'll explode.
Yeah, it will explode. And the same thing happens with us. That's where burnout comes in. That's where mental breakdowns come in. When you don't release it, when you don't have positive ways to release it, then one day you just eventually explode. And you don't want to do that. So again, if you can't take it to anybody else, who can you take it to? God. That's what he lets Elijah do right here. He just lets him let it all out. Just release it all. And you know what? God can handle it. There's nothing that you've got going on in your life that if you want to pour it out to God, that he can. He's never going to say, "Whoa, that's enough. I can't." You know, he's never going to do that to you. So talk to God. Talk to others. Find some way to release it in a non-negative way. All right, then point number 3, or part number 3, is refocusing.
But I think one thing we see here and tend to overlook is that Elijah did verbalize his position.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so instead of saying, you know, God help me with my troubles, it will help me to enumerate those troubles to God. Don't just say, help me with whatever I'm struggling with at the time, but to actually go in and detail it, because it refreshes me. And sometimes in the process of doing that, I say, boy, that's silly. You know, why am I upset about that? You know, so I think there's a process there that we can emulate.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's some good advice. Don't just be generic in your release. Like Frank said, you know, God help me with my troubles. Or if you're talking to another person, just say, well, these things are bothering me. You know, name them. You know, get specific with it. What's bothering you? Of course, that person you're talking to needs to be somebody that you can trust, somebody that, you know, will listen to you. But let those things out. All right, then number 3 is refocusing. So let's look at verses, we're going to look at verses 11 through 14. I'm going to let you do those.
Okay. So he said, go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord was passing by. And a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking it into pieces, and the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of gentle blowing. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah?
All right, I said through 14. We'll come back to that in a second. I want to stop right here. Okay? What do you think God's doing right here? Remember, Elijah's gone to the cave. He's hiding out in the cave. It's after he's eaten and had his rest, and then he's gone 40 days to Horeb. He's in the cave, and then God says, go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And then all these signs, the great and strong wind breaking the mountain into pieces, the earthquake, the fire. Why do you think God did that? Chris?
My interpretation of that is God's in the small things. We miss that a lot. That's the things I refer to as the God wings. When we're so overwhelmed and we're so busy with life, we miss them. But when we are forced to slow down sometimes, and to this point, is when we go away with him and we seek solace with him, and that's when we start hearing him in that still small voice, not the big things. That's when we realize he's been there all along. We've been looking and listening in the wrong places.
Okay. I think that's a good explanation. Any other ideas of why God did this?
Showing power.
Okay. I think to a certain extent he's showing Elijah his power, but I think he's doing it for a specific reason. Kelly?
Well, you said refocusing, so the best way to get somebody to focus on something else is sometimes to be dramatic.
Okay.
Like, hey, here's an earthquake and a fire and a couple other things. Okay, now that you dealt with that, are you ready to move on?
I think that's probably it. I think, remember, before this, what is Elijah focused on?
Himself.
Himself, all the negatives, everything going on. I think God was trying to get Elijah's attention so that he'll pay attention, but that's when he comes back, at the, where'd it go? The last part there, there's wind, earthquake, fire. God's not in those things, but he's using those to get Elijah's attention. And then there's the voice. The sound of a gentle blowing. Elijah goes out, he looks, there's the gentle voice, and God says what? What are you doing here? Now, again, what is intended by that question?
This is not where you should be.
Okay, I think that's part of it. God's trying to tell Elijah, this is not where you need to be. What else, Kelly?
He's just trying to get him to talk so he can get it out.
Okay, because again, we get to verse 14, and this is where the second time he says, he's getting it out. He's letting it out. And then we get to the recommitment. So he's trying to refocus Elijah's attention. He's trying to get him to stop looking inwardly and look outwardly and look at what God has for him to do. Because God wasn't done with Elijah. So he's got to get his attention off of himself, off of his problems, away from what has just happened, because all that's in the past now. Now, yes, Jezebel's still after him, but okay, you can't focus on the, that victory over the prophets. You can't focus on, those people should have turned to me, but they didn't. I've still got work for you to do, which is where we get to point number 4, and that is recommitment. Recommitment. Because if you keep reading in verses 15 and 16, after he vents again, God says to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Maholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place." So God basically says, I've got 3 tasks for you. You got to go and anoint 2 kings and anoint your own successor. So you're not done working, Elijah. So he's trying to refocus Elijah and tell him, you got to get up and keep going. You can't stay in this place anymore. And again, I think part of him asking, what are you doing here, Elijah, is to try to get Elijah to see, why am I here? Why am I in this cave? What was Elijah's job title? He's a prophet. Can he prophesy, or can he do a prophet's work inside of a cave? No. So God wanted him out and working. Sometimes it isn't a change of place or people that we need, and sometimes it is, but it's resetting our sights on God, refocusing on His Word, on His Son, and on His church. That's what we need to help us get out of this burnout cycle. Once the task was over, one task was over. It had been a challenge. It had been a burden. But after a time of rest, of prayer, and remember, after he had he rested and he ate, he rested and drank. How long did he travel from where he was to Horeb? 40 days. What do you think he's doing in that 40-day time period?
Hoping.
Okay. Apparently he's probably moping, because once he gets to the cave, he's still kind of upset there. But I think he probably did a lot of thinking.
And looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, and looking over his shoulder as well, yeah. But he had some time. He had some time to think and ponder. But again, he's still kind of wrapped up in himself, so that's why God has to get him out of that self-centered mindset and focused on his task. Now again, we said earlier, sometimes the task is what causes the burnout, and that's where the rest comes in, but we can't rest forever. We've got to rest, we've got to recharge, and then get back to the work that God wants us to do. Chris?
I think during that time period too, there was a lot of surrender going on.
Oh, yeah.
Just like the grief process, there's a point at which you have to surrender, like whatever happens. For, in his case, if I die, I die. Even the disciples did that at a certain point. Like,
Yep.
you know,
Do you see a connection here between modern day psychotherapy?
there's always a connection.
Yeah. Because if you fall off a horse, what do they tell you got to do?
Get back on it.
Get back on it. So if you have a traumatic event, what they say you got to do, you got to face that event and get back into it, or that event will rule your life or ruin your life. So, like I said, nothing new under the sun.
Another thing that I want to point out here too is, what specifically was Elijah doing before this chapter here?
Irritating Ahab and Jezebel.
Yeah.
He was somewhere prophesying, I mean, he was teaching somebody.
He's prophesying, yeah, but look at chapter 18. It's the summary I gave you before.
He's proving who God is.
Okay.
But now he's in a situation where he's like, are you God? And that's where that surrender is going back to the acknowledging who God is.
Yeah. So he's prophesying. Before this happens, he's prophesying against Ahab and Jezebel. He's trying to get the people to turn. He has this big showdown, the 3-year drought, all this stuff. His focus is trying to get the people to turn back to God. And so then he has the showdown. And now that he's gone through all this and he's in the cave, what task does God have for him?
Appoint rulers over the land.
Go appoint some new rulers.
And a successor.
He's still working for God, but in a different area. Sometimes, spiritually speaking, if we're suffering some spiritual burnout, maybe a refocus to a different type of task is what is needed. That may be also true when it comes to burnout in other areas, although, I know we can't always change our job, but maybe something about your job can change, or maybe you can focus on something different within the work that you're doing, so that you're not doing the exact same things you've been doing before, if that makes sense. So what God does here is he restores Elijah by giving him rest for his body, release for his soul, refocus for his spirit, recommitment for his heart, and a reinforcement of his ministry. And the reinforcement, we didn't get to this point, but remember, he's supposed to go anoint his successor, who was who?
Elijah.
Elisha, yeah. Now, they worked together for a little while. So God is giving him some help in the tasks that he has for him before he completely hands it over, the ministry to him. So, here's the big question. Well, before we get to the big question. This passage and other passages should tell us that God not only cares for us, but he knows what we need for what ails us in every single generation. If you are over anxious, if you're stressed, you're burned out, do you relate with some of Elijah's story here? I hope you do. I hope you do. His symptoms may be your symptoms, or at least some of them. But don't give up. Don't give up. Because if you're burned out, I encourage you to find God's prescription for burnout, which is find balance, express your emotions, reestablish your priorities, and then find some new ways to serve, if possible. All right, any final thoughts, comments, questions? Everybody's stressed from this study, aren't you? All right, Mark will be back next week, and we will have a new topic to discuss, so I encourage you all to be here. Thank you for being here tonight, and encourage you all to be here Sunday. Thank you for being here.
Back Wednesday. I had a 2-2-1.